Good evening. It is 5:30 and the Lake Mills Parks Board meeting of June 9th, 2025 is in session. The agenda, if you're unaware of it, I'll just read off what is on the agenda and then talk a little bit about the process that will follow for this evening's meeting. So we'll do a call to order, then a roll call. We'll have the Parks and Forestry Director's report, and then any corrections and approvals for the Parks Board meeting minutes of May 8th and May 12th. And then we have other public comments, including emails, new business, which is a presentation from the Rock Lake Improvement Association for the recommendations for Sandy Beach Redevelopment Project, discussion of and review of the City Council resolution for the Sandy Beach Recreational Developments, which may be brought up before we get to that because of some of the members in attendance. We just want to speak to that. And then we'll do announcements, and then on creating the next agenda meeting items, which will be for July 9th, I believe, July 14th, then adjournment. So call to order, roll call. Jason?
Jacob Slobby, present.
Tim Sprecher, present.
Mary Schmager, present.
Anita Martin, present.
Mike Niesman, present.
All right, thank you. And 3, Parks and Forestry Director's report from Eric.
I'll highlight a few things on here and then I'll open it up available for questions. So going down from the top, we are actively doing the tree diagnostics inspections at Sandy Beach. As soon as those results are completed, I'll be sharing it with the entire Parks Board. We are taking oak wilt samples at Sandy Beach as well as across the city for species and trees that may potentially have oak wilt. Again, those are actually confirmed by the University of Wisconsin Plant Disease Diagnostics Clinic. Those are not assessed by staff in-house. They have the lab and the capabilities to do so. And then lastly, Milton Street is under construction with the first pilot program for the tree protection policy. If you go down Milton Street, you'll see fencing around the trees along the terraces. That's actually the tree protection zone. So this will be the first project that we actually pursue that on, and it'll be reassessed at the end of the construction project on how successful the program was and continue diagnostics on those trees for the next couple of years. The first thing for parks is right now, daily parks maintenance and upkeep is the absolute priority for staff right now. During the season of time, we sustain and maintain our parks as much as possible and finish up as many outstanding projects as possible. With the last couple of weeks, we've been rained out several weeks, so when we get rain days, it prohibits us from mowing. Without having our full staffing capabilities filled at this time, it is difficult to keep up on. So the majority of our staff, or all of our staff, have been just keeping up on general property maintenance. However, today we did start with all of our staff being on board for this time being. So all of our seasonal staff are on duty, allows us to open up our capabilities a little bit more. With that being said, Memorial Park will be opened tomorrow. I will say it publicly and openly. Very excited that we had not as much rain as expected today, which will allow us to finish our final grading and seeding tomorrow with erosion control placed in tomorrow. So I will expect to have a public announcement tomorrow on the website as well as Facebook pages, letting people know that the Purple Playground is up and ready to go for you guys. This week, we will be having our Town and Country Days organizational meeting. There we go through with the building inspector, fire chief and fire inspector, police chief, and Christmas Amusements, everybody who's associated with the Town and Country Days Festival, where we create a daily agenda or itinerary of who's doing what and where to make sure it runs smoothly or as smoothly as possible. And other than that, we will be having geotechnical borings completed at Bartles Beach for the seawall project. This is going to be necessary as they finalize going through the process of the actual engineering and design. So they'll figure out the composition of those soils, which will aid in the final design of that. But I would expect to see some borings occurring at some point this week. These borings are very small borings, so they're not going to create obstructions to the park. And we'll see what the results are and see when the engineering results are complete. And lastly, I would expect if you guys remember Troop 8243 for the Girl Scouts, those signs will be installed, I would anticipate, by the end of this month. They are in the process of being manufactured right now, and as soon as I have them available, we'll be installing them at Bartles Beach. And then Troop 9046, we're planning a tentative date for the actual installation of the bat houses. And I believe they're actually going through a couple members of Rock Lake Improvement Association's assistance for bat counts. So excited to see what they come up with, and I'll be working with them towards the end of this month for installation. Any other questions? Can you hear me better is the next question. Okay.
Eric, I had one question on that Milton Street. Not all of the trees had the.
They will
fences
be.
up. Oh, they will have.
Yep,
okay.
just the terrace ones. So these are not any private trees. They're the ones within the sidewalk and the actual road, which is the terrace. They're not complete yet installing them, but they will all have TPZs, which is tree protection zone fencing installed.
Okay.
Eric, I had a question on the third bullet point of the second page regarding the security camera installation. Is that specifically at Sandy Beach, or is that where?
Sandy Beach right now, so this is a pilot program to see if it's something that we're going to be pursuing for final installation as we go through project development and budgeting for 2026. So I was approached by the company who actually has LPRs, which are license plate reader systems for the police department. They've went through an agreement for some updated security camera systems for them, asked if I would be interested in something like this with the main priority of being the park entrance and the boat launch. So primarily the boat launch is what will be pursued right now to assess any damages if there are any, and just to aid in enforcement, and then the park entrance area.
All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments? regarding
Just
the-
one briefly. How many? You said that you're going to be evaluating food truck. I thought that was here somewhere. And I just wonder how many do you have? You don't have to get into specifics, but
Right now, we have two.
two. Okay.
Yep, so right now we have two. Sandy Beach, for all the parks, there's a vendor's license that I approve or deny, and that's just for general parks access. They pay an annual fee to vend at the park. So if you see the fruit vendors at Rotary Park or something around Commons Park that is not a part of the farmer's market, they pay a vendor fee in order to vend there. Sandy Beach is specifically different because it does require a lease structure for annual payments and city council approval, so it's omitted from the normal vendor permit process, so it has to go through a review process.
Thanks.
Any others? Okay, if not, they're accepted. Let's move to the next agenda item, which is corrections and/or approval of Parks Board meeting minutes of May 8th. So looking at May 8th, the special meeting work session, any comments, corrections to the minutes as presented? Right, hearing none, do we have a motion to accept the meetings as written?
I make a motion to accept.
Second.
All right, so vote aye to accept?
Aye.
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 All right, Parks Board minutes of May 8th are accepted. Moving to the Parks Board minutes of May 12th, 2025. Any corrections or such? All right, hearing none, do I have a motion to accept the meeting minutes of May 12th as written?
I move to accept the May 12th meeting minutes for the Parks Board as printed.
And do we have a second?
Second.
All right, so the vote,
Aye.
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 All right, so the meeting minutes of May 12th are accepted as presented and written. So let's move to the public comments, including emails. And I just want to make a comment here before we begin, as far as process and responsibilities. The resolution, if you're here to talk about the resolution regarding the Sandy Beach trailer park and such, please be aware that you are welcome to make comments here so they can be recorded and noted, but that is not, it's beyond the purview, thank you, Mike, of the Parks Board to make any decisions. So, yeah, you're welcome to make comments, but we have no authority to make decisions. That is part of the city council's resolution. Is that a fair enough statement? All right. So, If not, any other public comments that people have gotten that they'd like to present now, including emails? Mike?
I had two. One, I talked to a woman who really enjoyed the new park down, or the new playground equipment down at Sandy, and I told her we were going to do it also out at, at Bartles at Sandy. She was enthused. I said, any suggestions? And she said, perhaps something for smaller kids, like those little rocking horses or something, would be something to consider. But
So,
she was-
Mike, you really want one of those little, back digger grader type things that you see?
A John Deere would be nice. And second, I think your new city website is really an outstanding advance over what we had.
Thank you. And any input too, just let me know. We're kind of navigating and seeing what efficiencies we can make and how easy things are to navigate. So just let us know. Trying to make it easy.
All right, thank you. Anita, you had a comment?
Yes, I did have a request for further information of when we're having a public information meeting, that the Parks Board will be addressing recreational aspects of the Sandy Beach project and when people can have input.
And with that comment, do we have any more details regarding said meeting?
June 23rd would work just fine, but it would have to be in the community center. So we would be able to hold a public information meeting if the board decides to hold one and agree upon a date.
And then we are able to record that and people can view it on,
We can, I would have to confirm with Dave. I don't want to throw him under the bus too much, but we would have to have some way of recording it.
yeah. So we just want to make people aware of that, and it most likely will be on the website and we'll get it out there.
Now, if the 23rd is not agreed upon, what I can do is find a day that would work within council chambers, but it would not be the 23rd, and it most likely would not be a Monday.
All right, so when might we get that details? Because we would like to move forward on the public comment.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay.
What I'll do is I'll confirm with you, Tim, and I'll set out a few dates to the board, and if there's one is that is agreed upon out of, two options, I'll let you guys know.
Okay. And any other comments regarding the request?
Well, last time I did mention that if we can keep with the Monday, because I know I myself have other meeting commitments on different days of the week, and I think other people may as well. So I don't know if that's feasible, but the sooner we can get it agreed upon amongst ourselves, and then if we can immediately get it posted on the website, that would be good. Thank you.
Is that something we need to maybe discuss and make a proposal to have it and agree as a board at this moment? I think that'd be wise. So I want to make a motion to have the meeting defined or set on June 23rd, Monday at 5:30 downstairs.
What I would say is when we have the future or next meeting agenda, for number 9 on the agenda, you could just say that we were holding a public information meeting on June 23rd prior to our scheduled July 14th meeting.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure that it's out there and people know they can plan for that. So thank you, Anita, and thank you, Eric. Any other public comments? Yes, Mary?
I received some information regarding I would say floating aqua, how do you describe it, Eric?
Obstacle course?
Obstacle course, like it's a big blow-up floating, I don't know, how do you picture, I should have brought an exhibit, for consideration. It's like a floating water activity, series of things that you hook together. So it's like a I don't know how to describe it, but I think it's very interesting. I think more research needs to be completed. We'd have to think about how it would work. It's a possibility for something we might be able to monetize or consider on a small scale that might have expandability. And I shared some materials with Eric just right before the meeting so that he has actually participated or has seen this kind of floating obstacle course, because I'll describe it. It's a plaything it's like a playground on the water. And so there's one in Sheboygan that he has actually been at. And so I think it's just something for us to learn more about for consideration and discussion at a future meeting. But I didn't have anything else other than that new
Okay.
topic.
All right, thank you, Mary. And with that, Eric, I'm going to guess we're going to go with options, including price and such?
Yep, that would be correct. The biggest one would be like access and stuff like that, if it's timed, and I need to do further research on it. What I can do is, since it would just be a supplemental document, I can forward it to you guys to look at before our next meeting. So as soon as I have that information available, I'll send it to you guys just as a supplementary document.
And also with that, maybe other communities in
Yep.
our area that have it, so we can either look on their website or get an idea what.
Precisely, that's kind of what Mary and I went over.
All right, thank you very much. Any other?
Just off of Mary's comment about the inflatable playground, there is one about 5 miles down the road at a private resort, Riverbend Resort. It's substantial in size, but it does look like the kids are having a lot of fun. So wanted to go check that out in person.
All right, thank you.
Where was that, you said?
Riverbend Resort.
It's just past Milford, Milford, right? So, on the river. Imagine that, huh? All right, thank you, Jason. Anita?
I forgot one thing. I did receive information from a resident that last week, some young people were jumping off of the bridge by Bartles into the water. And that's kind of dangerous with the rocks and the length of the depth of the water. So I think that a police officer or someone from the sheriff's department came and spoke with the individuals, but we just want to make sure that that's avoided. I mean, kids can be kids, but I knew a person years ago that broke their neck doing that somewhere and was, a paraplegic, so thank you.
Which bridge was that?
It was the,
The Archway?
yeah, the Archway Bridge.
All right, thank you. So, any other public comments that people would like to make at this point? Again, if you are, please come to the mic, state your name and address.
Okay, my name is Nancy Gant. My address is,
Please make sure your microphone is on too. You have the green button on it.
the
Perfect.
light's on.
Perfect.
My name is Nancy Gant. My address is 855 East Lake Street. I also have a mobile home at Sandy Beach. There are several of us city residents and mobile home park residents here to find out more about the beach and parking development. Forgive me if this has been addressed, however, I have watched your last meeting and there was no mention of golf cart parking. There are a lot of residents, both at Sandy Beach and Topol's Home Park, that rely on them to get as close to the beach as possible due to age and/or health reasons. They are able to walk a shorter distance, and having a place for them to park their carts is crucial so they can enjoy the beach as well. There are even some that have been given handicap stickers to allow for a cart to actually drive through the gate to drop off the person in need. Will golf cart parking be included in this plan? Also, fence parking for boats. This is not storage. These boats are brought in on April 15th and must be removed by October 15th. There is mention of getting rid of this. There are mobile home and city residents that I believe anyway, that utilize this. Someone mentioned this is the same boats year after year. Just like lifts, people pay to park their boats there for a convenience and close proximity to the launch when putting their boats in the water on the weekends. Just like the lifts, I believe there is a waiting list for the fence parking as well. Also mentioned was people can park their boats somewhere else. Where would this parking be? Where would they put their boat trailers while the boats are in the water and not take up spaces in the launch for other city residents or out-of-towners? The fence parking makes approximately, from what I can figure out, $17,000 in revenue for the city, which is very low overhead. While not a windfall, would it make sense to keep this amenity and income? Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any questions regarding that or other comments? Okay, if not, any other?
Hi, my name's Julie Bean, 336 Sandy Beach Road and number 9 in the Pines Trailer Park. As a resident of both communities, I'm most concerned with the fiscal cost of the project versus the gain. Thank you.
Any other comments? Any comments or questions from the Parks Board? Well, thank you for your input, and they'll certainly, I do have a question on this, goes back to our discussion. I know when we had the working meeting that I missed on Sandy Beach, what was addressed as far as the golf cart parking and such? I'm not seeing it on this.
It's not been specifically written at this point. Those are placeholders at this point for the actual concept that's designed, but not discussed at this point if we're going to pursue it or not.
And I'm not sure that it fits within the resolution for the Parks Board, because we have recreation opportunities is really our focus, and I would say that the parking strategy would likely be on the city council agenda and level versus the Parks Board. Even though our decisions will influence parking, I think parking is out of scope for us. I'm confident it is.
Okay, thank you for that information. All right, if not, any other more comments or such, we'll move on to the next part of the new business, presentation from the Rock Lake Improvement Association.
Yikes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. And Dave, I guess I'll just say next to advance the slides. Okay. Regarding Rock Lake, your mandate clearly encompasses swimming safety at Sandy Beach and the need to manage beach closures and warnings. These warnings and closures arise, next, from an abundance of E. coli. The issue of beach health in southern Wisconsin, and then Dave, you only have to hit it once because everything's set up on animation, so just hold it for a sec there. Thanks. The issue of beach health in southern Wisconsin is only going to increase due to rising summertime temperatures and the flashy rain events. The Sandy Beach redesign is a once-in-a-lifetime chance to incorporate the best beach health practices to protect our residents while they enjoy Rock Lake. If we focus on this objective, which is the E. coli management, we can also see other benefits, such as reducing the likelihood of algae blooms and forestalling blue-green algae blooms, which we have not seen on our lake, but it plagues the Madison beaches. And then what I wanted to point out to you here is, well, there you go. Here and here are algae blooms as seen at Korth Park, okay, Korth Beach. So this is the floating filamentous algae, looks like green sponge. Here you can see it suspended on the plants. As it dies, it floats up here. This is what the blue-green algae looks like. We, I repeat, do not yet have that on Rock Lake, but it is in all the Madison chains, and they now routinely monitor for blue-green algae, and beaches are routinely closed. Next slide. Okay, stay right there. To have a definitive answer, we would need a comprehensive study, which would take time and resources which the city might not want to prioritize at this time. According to McClellan, a professor at the University of Milwaukee School of Freshwater Sciences, quote, "E. coli doesn't tell you anything about the source of what's there. If you don't know the source, you don't know where to direct your management strategies. Should I be chasing away the birds, or should I be looking for leaking sewage pipe nearby?" And then to top it off, the other problem is that E. coli survives outside of its host. There's prolonged survival in the sand, and maybe even further growth if nutrients are available, unquote. Research is showing that E. coli can survive for weeks or even indefinitely in sand. To move forward quickly, Sandy Beach decision makers should all agree that reasonable sources include, next, manufactured home complexes or the trailer parks, possible sanitary sewer failures, which could impact groundwater. Another possible source could be the stormwater sewer discharge located just west of the boat launch, which could have raccoon poop in it, or aging sanitary pipes leaking at junctions with the stormwater sewers. There could be avian sources, such as geese and gulls, and finally, user impacts, such as feeding geese and gulls, encouraging the birds to clump together, leaving trash, which attracts the birds as well, runoff from pet waste, and a failure to use swim diapers or even swimming when you're ill. Next slide. Anything regarding the manufactured home complex will be addressed with the redesign. The Parks Board City Council rep should make sure that the focus of the redesign includes preserving clean groundwater. And likewise, analyzing the stormwater sewer could be addressed at a later date. That leaves, next, an education plan. A plan should be developed to encourage users to not feed geese and gulls, to not swim if ill, and to use swim diapers. And next. And you might consider pet waste stations along the park's edge and the Sandy Beach Road as being another good option to encourage people to pick that up. Next slide. For avian sources, we need to prevent stormwater runoff from the upland park coming down into the beach, carrying E. coli, other bacteria, nutrients, and sediment. And so this is just representing your design. It is not your final concept design. But the idea is we need to prevent stuff from here, the grass areas and that sort of stuff, going down to the beach, and then we need to try to figure out a way to keep geese on the water from coming up the water and going upland to feed on the grass. Next. So planners and engineers can look at a topo of our project, and I just kind of gave a visual idea of what a topo might look like. Again, that's not ours. And it can determine where the directions of water flow, its sheet flow and concentrated patterns. At the junction of turf and sand, native vegetated buffers can be placed to absorb and clean the water. Next. Buffers are proven to uptake sediment, nutrients, and bacteria. So in this chart here, it's hard to see the name of all those individual plants in this chart, but the turf is over here. And you can see the root systems on that, right? Even if you stick with low-growing plants, like over here in a sedge, you can see how much deeper the roots are. Next. This is a
Sorry, can I
picture.
interrupt one second? You said turf. Is that the far left that has no roots at all? Correct.
Yeah, in relationship to the scale of everything else. Okay, so this picture over here is, again, just trying to give you the idea of the depth of this root system. These are some native grasses that this guy is holding up. And the thing that makes this work is that every year is estimated about a third of its root system dies. Why is that valuable? The stormwater comes running across here, hits those channels, and infiltrate deeply. Next year, it's a different section. Next year, it's a different section. And it keeps rejuvenating like that and bringing in the stormwater. Another bonus to these native plants, again, next. Geese, as you see here, like a clear line of sight. They do not like to approach vegetated buffers. And interestingly, geese, like humans, like to walk in a straight line. And that's why if you go to some of these beaches that have been redone on Lake Michigan, you'll notice the access to the beach isn't straight down anymore. It's kind of a little bit zigzaggy. Again, they're trying to discourage geese. I can testify in my own situation. My neighbor has a lot of grass, spends a lot of time trying to keep the geese off his grass. The geese turn around to come my direction. I've got vegetated buffers, and they turn around and would rather do battle with my neighbor. So, next. I'm very pleased that the park board is concerned about trees and shade. But even more critical from an E. coli perspective is corridors of native plantings. Plantings such as this, as you see here, has helped Lake Ripley reduce beach closures by 30%. What should the board do next? Insist that the city's contracted engineers, which is Strand, and their planners, Mead and Hunt, bring this vision to fruition. I've spoken to consultants in this field of work, and they have commented favorably on the resources at Mead and Hunt who design SWIPs, or stormwater preservation plans. The city has not asked for this service in the Sandy Beach design. I've also spoken to a project manager who worked with Strand to successfully implement a zero stormwater provision into a nearby water body. So they have the skills and the resources. If they don't, they will get those resources from subcontractors, such as restoration ecologists. Interestingly, the city of Sun Prairie used restoration ecologists to design a native vegetated management plan for their pumpkin patch facility. And these specialists carefully considered plant selection, erosion control products, and provided robust planting, maintenance, and monitoring guidelines. And that facility is actually being hydroseeded today. It's imperative that both Strand and Mead and Hunt understand your priorities and expectations. Part of understanding a client's priorities from their perspective is knowing that the client is committed to their priorities. Next. The city must assign responsibility to monitor the process from start to finish to ensure the function of this infrastructure. This is critical. We've already seen a situation where ineffective monitoring will result in costly remediation if the city chooses to bring the project into compliance with its original approved plan. Next. So here you see, this is the published plan 2020. This is that boat launch. This is what actually got implemented over here. Originally, the buffer between Sandy Beach Road and the boat launch was designed by Mead and Hunt as a native vegetated buffer, absorbing stormwater and everything that stormwater carries. This was the approved plan submitted to the DNR and the county. You can see from the picture of the swale, which I took in the winter of 2022, it is turf. Turf's effectiveness in stormwater management is pretty close to that of asphalt. This breach happened under a different city council, a different city manager, a different parks director. But why did it happen? Probably because this design feature was not valued by the city, it was not monitored, and in the end, the contractor did not implement it. This time around, we must pay attention. It is always more money and much less effective to try to add something later than to design it in from the beginning and follow through. Next. So in summary, we urge the Parks Board to adopt the following recommendations to the City Council. Next. Manage E. coli by utilizing native buffers to absorb stormwater runoff and break up the clear line of sight for the geese. These buffers would be placed strategically where they have the best impact. Managing stormwater in this way is not controversial, and it is widely accepted. Next. Make sure that what is designed is actually implemented so that it functions as intended. Next. Develop an education plan for beachgoers. And again, lastly, consider a pilot program where, Eric's going to love this one, park staff picks up goose poop along the beach during just the most susceptible summer period, which when I looked at the last 5 years, it seems like the third week of July to the third week in August. Beach management guidelines used to encourage raking, since it was believed that the UV light of the sun would help lower the E. coli impact, and Eric has mentioned doing that. But now, as we mentioned earlier, research is showing that it's much better to rake or sweep the piles up because the E. coli is not necessarily reduced by the UV light anymore, and it stays within the sand. So, do you have any questions by any chance? And at any point, we can go deeper into any part of the subject. I just wanted to give you guys an overview of where we were thinking.
Eric?
I actually have to take an emergency phone call right now. I'll be right back.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Mary.
So I recall, and this is like years ago, that geese also don't like rocks, like rocks. That they if you have a rock not that, it's kind of similar to the native vegetation buffers, but they also don't like rocks. Is that another, I don't know the pros and cons of utilizing rocks as a part of a landscape design, and do they prohibit or help in any way, shape, or form? I'm just thinking of, some natives are tough in a shaded area. At least I'm having a hard time with natives in my shaded areas. And so I'm just curious if there are other natural elements that I'm sure experts would know, but I'm just curious about rocks in particular. I thought they didn't like to walk over stoned areas.
Right. So we can look in that more as far as integrated further upland, but I've got two ideas on that. Rock, in my experience that I've watched, has not done much to save my neighbor. They fly right up and over that riprap and head for that lovely green grass. And then you're absolutely right about having trouble growing something in shade. And if we remember, the playground area up there is kind of shady. Hopefully, we'll be able to keep the trees. And I think Mary's observation is one reason why you would strongly want to have a subcontractor, ecological restoration person do that, because the selection of plants is going to be critical. So in that case, for example, they would probably go with something low-growing like sedges that sort of look grass-esque, but have very deep root systems, because growing something in shade is a whole different thing. And you saw in Lake Ripley, that's all sun. Right? And so it's a completely different plant selection. And I can tell you, too, from growing native buffers myself, the way they operate together is super important. And we don't want to keep remediating, so having somebody with some real skill in designing these things is actually critically important. It's not just plants being put in, but how they work together and whether they'll survive in the environment that you're in. The other thing that will be very important, which is what a restoration ecologist would do, would be to help us understand maintenance issues, whereas every other plan I've ever seen, they say, oh, maintenance might be required, but not much else. So I think that's going to be very important for us to understand.
I had a question.
Jacob.
So these buffer zones you're speaking of, if we were to hypothetically install them in the parking lot or next to Sandy Beach Road, is that close enough to the actual sand of the beach, or would that be kind of a waste of money?
Actually, you bring up a really good question. Should you put up that's in the swale? Would that help? Yes, that would help, because I've seen geese walking up and down that swale all over the place. I have had a resident tell me that he was out fishing and saw the water coming down that swale and running into the lake that was brown from all the dirt that it was carrying. So, yeah, the thing that I always was worried about was the cost of putting in plugs. Mike could tell you, putting in little tiny plants like they did in Lake Ripley, that's a different investment. But like I said, I just talked to somebody who did hydro seeding for a very similar sort of thing in some prairie, which is a lot less money. Maybe that's something that we think about for that swale, which would be, more economical. But as far as your other question, would that be enough? I think we really need to have experts looking at the shape of the land coming in, and there might be valuable pockets to insert. I'm not expecting, twisty paths like that, trying to get down to Sandy Beach. But I do think there's more we could do to intercept the water. Yep.
Would like a flower box or a planter be something that might work along those lines? Are there any trees that specifically like geese are opposed to, like are evergreens versus deciduous? Is that a possibility?
Well, what's interesting there is you're seeing the plants really like as a barrier. Okay, a visual barrier, which is a creative way to look at it. But then the problem with that approach only is that you're not absorbing the E. coli that's coming from their pooping in the grass and all around as they feed and forage. And so by putting in planted material, you're trying to capture some of that runoff and absorb it into the ground away from the swimmers. But I think these are all excellent questions, and we can bring some consultants to have you guys ask them questions. Anything else? Mike?
First, the website is excellent. I looked at that today. It's quite useful, the one about water safety and all that.
Oh, thank you.
Second, will that presentation be on the
Yes, so what-
site for the city?
Yeah, what I thought, well, I don't know for the city, but what I thought I would do, and I can send it to Eric, is I would take the slides and put them in a PDF, and then basically the script, I will put it under each slide so that somebody can read it and basically get an idea of what was said. I thought that was useful. They could obviously listen to it, but, you know, a lot of people are readers. We will also send that to all our members and other municipal leaders like the town board, just to keep them informed, our county representatives to keep them informed, and the city council.
And the last question I have is, you sound, even though we don't know, you sound personally relatively confident that the geese are a major contributor.
I think geese are a major contributor. I don't think it's unreasonable. I do think there's other contributors possibly,
Sure.
but I think this is a reasonable approach. And like I said, when I talked to the guys over in Lake Ripley, and they spent a couple years to actually do all those plans, I'm like, I don't think we have the time nor the interest in, you know, doing groundwater studies and all the rest of it. And they agreed. They're like, hey, everybody worries about geese. You might as well worry about geese. It's straight up, and we see geese there.
So I'm just wondering, you probably looked into this, you couldn't just do, like, I'm not sure it's DNA, RNA, but genetic sampling of the predominant E. coli in the effluent, if you will, and then if you could get some goose poop or do samples coming out of the stormwater drainage, would that be prohibitively expensive?
That is an excellent question, and when I was on the JRLC, we actually offered that as a possibility, and I worked with State Lab to figure how do you do that genetic testing in order to determine. And they did say it is possible. However, caveat, 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 in making sure that you got the right sample and making sure that they could process it in the right amount of time. If we were trying to figure if it was coming out of the stormwater, it had to have a certain rate of flow. It would have had to come out of a certain storm surge in order to get it. And it sounded complicated. So the advice that I was getting from multiple sources, including State Lab, was like, why don't you just implement the best practices of beaches? And then if you're still absolutely not coming down, then maybe hit hot spots. But, and so that's the basis of our recommendation. And then,
I had
Jake.
another question. Is the exhaust from boats coming off the boat launch or the boat lifts to the far west side of the beach, are they contributing at all to E. coli in the water? Because as I understand it, the current is basically moving from west to east in front of Sandy Beach, slightly as there's sand piling up on the east side of Sandy Beach. So does that contribute to any of the bacteria?
No, it's got to be some kind of host, you know. So we'll probably be good. But the one thing that they do say is that E. coli can get broken up as far as being concentrated with waves, all right? And perhaps with the winds and things like that, at certain times of the year, if they kind of break down or calm down, you'll get pockets of which will be worse. But it does seem like it's less likely that it's the gulls sitting in piles in April and then in September contributing to our issues in July and August. Because it would be watered down, waves would break it up, and we're not swimming in September. Anita, did you?
Anita, you had a question?
Yes, I do have a question. So in terms of possible subject matter experts that could potentially provide some pro bono assessment for us, do we have some people in mind that it would help keep the price down here?
Yeah, what I would recommend to begin with is just, staying local. RLIA could talk to the engineers who did the Lake Ripley project. This is the same group that has been hired by Sun Prairie to do work for them. In fact, one of the contractors has actually been hired to be their stormwater manager. That's how much Sun Prairie liked him. And they're not known for throwing money around, Sun Prairie, in their parks. So that's what I would do first, I would think. We just have to figure out what's the best usage of their expertise. You know, when would the best time be for a presentation? One of the things that most impressed me, though, with a guy named Jay Stedderston was his discussion of how much time he took at Lake Ripley to work with staff, park staff, to understand mowing requirements so that they weren't mowing down, and they understood why they weren't mowing down the native plantings and understanding the whole process of maintenance. So they've got quite a bit of practical boots-on-the-ground experience.
I have a couple questions.
Sure,
One
Tim.
goes to Eric and the other back to the impacts. And that right now, if we're looking at that swale and we're looking at some sort of sedges as such in the breaks between sand and such, is that?
It could be up higher than, you know, when they use the terminology, the sand and turf meeting, truly, if you see, they're not thinking that you'd be walking next to a sedge right on the sandy beach. It would be up a little bit, upland,
Okay.
you know.
All right, thank you.
But still, it would be plantings.
Right.
Yeah.
And with that, do we have that ability now to do something that would help mitigate the things going down that swale? I know we've got the rocks that are in certain parts, but is there any way that we could put sedges or some of these other things, we could have recommendations in the next, even weeks?
It depends on planting location as well and what we plan on planting. Plugs could be planted or something like that along those lines. I'd have to look and see what pricing is as far as operational budgets, but I can't imagine that it would be that expensive. Otherwise, I would probably pursue a fall planting at that point to where it would be dormant seed throughout the winter and be planted up in the following spring. I've had successes with that. So immediate solutions, it would be planting plugs. Next season solutions would be retilling that area, putting in erosion control and erosion control matting with seeds.
Do we have anyone that is looking as an Eagle Scout project or the things that might be willing to do some of that now?
In the hopper right now, no. But I can at least reach out and see what we can do for immediate resolutions.
All right, thank you. And then the other question I had is, we talked about the remedial stuff. Do we have information as what specific events and that happened, stormwater and, plumage out, either sediment or such, into the things and what happened and what it costs to remediate that damage? Do we have any numbers?
No, we haven't gone through that, and then, Eric was talking about, well, maybe we could do plugs. That's a possibility. Maybe seeding might be such a big area if you wanted to do that. If you're like, well, it's not fast enough, you still have to think about like educating, maybe getting a community of volunteers who would be willing to do some maintenance. They need to be trained, even if we put out a bid for Rock Lake people. The other thing that we probably would need to do is to make sure, and I'm not sure I'm using the correct term, Eric, but the outlet, or what happens is that swale comes down, it has a rock break, swale, rock break, and then it ends in this, I don't know what you call it. It's like where the stormwater is supposed to go in. There was some concern that that might not even be at the right height to be able to infiltrate. So we could do, you'd have to maybe pay for an engineer to just verify that it's at the right height to what was designed for a native planting. So, I think it's a really important, but it would take just a little planning.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't do this in June, July, and August.
Right. I was just trying to get ideas what we have as far as immediate and then planning. But if we
budget.
can prevent
Yep.
things, we might as well try.
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? All right. Is there a request for Eric or any other requests from the,
No, just that I hope that we can work together and figure out how to utilize the resources of RLIA to help impact the design, and we look forward to working with you. We really do think this is a very incredibly important thing. It's going to be harder and harder to manage. The algae blooms in Rock Lake, I've taken many calls already this year, like, what's going on? Why are we seeing so much algae in Rock Lake? And I'm like, oof, it's a long story. We're all responsible for that. Every homeowner around the lake is responsible for managing the phosphorus flowing and the nutrients flowing into the lake. People who are feeding the watershed, and then Sandy Beach could be. So we all need to work together to get it done.
okay, thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. All right, well, thanks. Let's move on to this item B of the new business, which is discussion review of the City Council Resolution 2519, Sandy Beach Recreational Developments. And with this, we have a number of presentations and probably some comments. So does anyone want to lead off the
Tim, if I could make one comment?
Absolutely.
At the last Parks Board meeting, we talked about a version A and a version B, or our conceptual things. They are still being drafted. As soon as they are prepared, they'll be provided to all the Parks Board members.
All right, thank you. That helps because there was a question that I had as to the presentation that was made and this document here. I don't know if we want to label it, but I'm going to label it May 12th, or what day is today?
Oh, it says R. They're calling that Exhibit R. See the big R? in
Oh,
the-
I thank you,
call that
yeah.
R.
Yes, thank you.
That's to keep things
Yeah, so
consistent.
Exhibit R, thank you, Mary. Just so we know what we're talking about, so we have two Rs, right? We have small R and we have big R over here.
So what I have for you, this was at Mike's request, this was at a prior city council meeting. Perhaps Mary can talk a little bit about it as well, but it was requested that we provide a updated timeline or project timeline on what would be feasible as we move forward. So these color codes coordinate to the color codes of that itemized list that's also provided. So that is from a city council meeting. I don't know if Mary, you want to go over kind of what was discussed at city council?
Yeah, so this R exhibit is the same exhibit we were utilizing at our last Parks Board meeting. The colors are just representing a possible phased approach, and so coming with this is the table that is attached as well, color-coded at possibly we could do the greens in 27, the yellows in fall 27, 28. This was just a conceptual phase map, but it isn't anything that has been, it's not finalized. It was just an initial like layout. The group working on the Sandy Beach efforts are working on the financial impacts and options and around all of the phases and excluding like the details, because we are on the details of the, as you all know, of the beach recreation side, but the high level, mainly infrastructure and kind of, I would say, like a round budget to suggest that we might put X amount of dollars towards the beach side of things. And so this was just a start to get the city council thinking and familiar with what a possible layout could look like.
All right, thank you. And please correct me if I missed something. I thought that at our last meeting, we had made a recommendation that the beach was going all the way from what I'm seeing now is yellow and then pink or whatever color that is. Coral. From our discussions last time, wasn't that our recommendation that the beach would go all the way along that?
Yep, you're correct. So those are the two, if we said our option A and an option B, those are still what are actually being rendered. It'll be provided to you. So yes, those are still standing recommendations from Parks Board. What you're seeing here was just a working document from council for the timeline, separate from those two. So as soon as those are available, they just were not completed in time for the Parks Board meeting this evening. But those are still active recommendations that'll be given to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
And I would like to note that in one of the points of discussion, there was a note that suggested the elements of, on the beach side, the park, the playground, the elements that we're talking about can be kind of almost phased at any time. I don't want to say any time, but that can be on its own timeline. So we have it sounds like flexibility or optionality. Some of this timeline was trying to do complementary things, like use the same kind of equipment, or one impacts the other, if I was understanding the layout correctly. But the things that we're working on really can begin whenever we're ready.
I think there would be some specifics with like utility installation or something, whatever, but they can be pursued as potential standalone projects separate from the parking area, trailer home park, et cetera. So again, we are referencing the recreational amenities here. Still consider those to be what you guys are drafting separate from what's proposed here at the city council level. So hopefully that kind of clears up the time frame stuff here.
Well, I had one question on that. Remember, perhaps you can address this. I just noticed on the CIP for potential phasing plan, and I understand that's potential.
Which document are you looking at, Mike?
It's the CIP for potential black and white. It has, in the far left has years, and you go down, and the far right has year total. And I was struck by the 2030 for ice rink, concession shelter, warming hut, and et cetera. I'm just wondering if that, how firm that is that by design? Because that would be added in at the end. It would have a bearing, I would think, on our discussions. If it's 5 years hence, then we might not want to get too involved in details because everything can change over a couple of years.
As of right now, it's still purely conceptual, Mike.
So this
So-
2030 is.
I mean,
who
we're
knows?
planning as much as possible in advance. Those are some of the more bigger ticket items of the actual park renovations, if that makes sense. So like the concession shelter and picnic shelter, concessions area would be some of the things requiring individual engineering, design, the larger, bigger ticket expenses or items within the park development. But they could be prioritized, I suppose, at any point within the park development. So 2030, that's absolutely conceptual at this point.
And this is maybe not possible, but I'm looking at the CIP for a potential phasing plan. Is there a way we could put on there the money, these are in 2025 dollars? You know, because I'm going to guess that the first part, 2025, says $160,000 to do this. Then it says in 2030, it says $3 million. But that's $3 million in 2025 dollars.
You're correct, yes.
So
Inflation adjusted.
yeah, so we might just want to make a note of that everything you're seeing here is based on 2025 dollars.
So if you recall, when we had the Mill Pond conversations, we were looking at a document that was several years old, and we had to do what's called an OPCC, that's updating opinion of projected construction cost. So it would be the exact same thing, inflation calculators, everything else applied to it.
Yeah, thank you. Any other discussions, comments regarding the plans, such? Lots of work.
Well, I know we had talked about the volleyball court's impact, but without the exhibits that are being worked on, I think that's kind of a hard one for us to get our head wrapped around today.
What I would suggest at this point, so like I said, those will be provided as soon as possible. What I would say at this point is finalizing some of the layouts of some of the things you're talking about, like the concession shelter. And then also, I did have some public correspondence to relay regarding, I requested that they attend this evening, but they were not able to, regarding the volleyball courts. And from the actual league, 4 courts is drastically preferred over 2. I did discuss the likelihood of having split league systems or redesigned league structures, which I think would still be an option, but the current league coordinators do prefer 4 courts.
Any other?
I just had a question about volleyball. So right now, the current volleyball system program is it Tuesday, Wednesday nights? Is it 2 nights a week, or is it?
Correct, yeah. So right now, it's split, majority of the teams play on Wednesday evening, but they had enough teams to have secondary evening already.
And would adding an extra day be a possibility, because just to alleviate the stress on the courts?
I think it's already been done because there was the amount of or teams signing up for it, I think another day could be added to make up for it, I suppose. If you figure now, if we already have 4 courts and let's say they have so many teams playing each evening, you would just have to extend it by double if you only have 2 courts already. But I suppose they would just have to change the organizational structure if they have 2 courts.
Was 3 courts a possibility?
It could be, but then it comes down to kind of like what we were discussing last time. Do you prioritize the open green space? It all comes down on what would be prioritized, the 4 courts or 3 courts or 2 courts. Right now, what I have in the conceptual plans, the ones that are being rendered for you guys, one version has 2 courts, one version has 4 courts. One just takes up more space within the park, extends into the beachway a little bit, kind of gets pulled towards the actual park entrance area. It just takes up more room, kind of like we measured on the park. So those are still being rendered to represent 2 courts and 4 courts, 2 separate options.
I have a question. The 2 renderings that we'll get later, is the angling of the proposed volleyball courts going to be the same on the two different ones? I know we talked about the angle being a potential issue with the glare of the sun and stuff.
It would be taken into account to make sure that they would still be playable. Now, the version with the 4 courts actually does get extended, if you recall, closer towards that actual retention area or retention basin towards the parking lot, but at least they would be oriented correctly so people could still play.
Any other questions?
Some of the questions that I had that came up when I was speaking with Mean as they were going through these renderings is last time we had talked about the multi-purpose shelter. If we had one shelter to house both restrooms, concession area, picnic shelter, et cetera, is it still generally favored to have one structure over a separate bathroom structure? And speaking with some of the staff, at least my staff, I think it would be easier maintenance-wise and just operational-wise to have a dedicated restroom shelter, separated from food service, separated from the concessions area. And if we have several hundred people on the beach, it was just generally thought that that amount of restroom traffic would warrant its own building. So some of these things, as these renderings are still being completed, would kind of help me guide me a little bit. But that was generally my thought. I think I would still be favorable of having a picnic concession shelter separate from a restroom structure, especially if we're going to be having outdoor shower stations as well, but generally looking to see what the Parks Board feedback is.
And is there an idea where that separate structure might be located?
Yeah, so when we were talking last time, it was, there were 2 options. You could kind of leave it where it is a little bit and change the orientation. Jacob, perhaps you could flesh this out a little bit too, kind of moving it towards northeast within the park from where it currently is in the relation to that plaza. On the back of this concept R, you'll see that blown up portion of it that might help a little bit. But Jacob, if you want to provide some input on kind of where you're thinking of it as well. And that will be reflected in those conversations that we had, will be reflected in the concepts.
Okay, yeah, I know that we had talked about moving everything to the northeast, and I think we had talked about the volleyball basically being adjacent to the boat launch parking, so
Yeah.
way farther back. I have that big chart if that helps anyone visually.
The flip side of this.
And if it helps, you can do it side by side that way.
But I suppose, what are the board's thoughts on having the dedicated restroom structure separate from a concessions area? They would be 2 separate buildings within the park. I'm trying to consolidate everything as much as possible with less structures within the park, but I do think that a restroom structure would be warranted to be standalone from a concession area.
My biggest concern is I don't want to take nature out of nature, and I think if we have too many buildings,
Yeah,
it
that's
kinda
kind of the
detracts
balance and the
from
struggle with it.
the point of being outside.
But I'm wondering if the total square footage, the footprint of 2 buildings versus 1 is going to be that much different, because I have to say my inclination, just as a physician, is to separate sewage, showers, et cetera, from food. That's just kind of a cardinal rule. So I don't know that we're going to be losing that much square footage of green. We're simply going to be, we'd be separating the buildings. I get your point, but
Yeah, I don't know if if there's anything more. My bias would be to have two separate buildings for the things that Mike just said, and I just think aesthetics wise and stuff, you can move it a little bit and people flow and potentially maybe goose flow, I don't know, just put it in a place that'll block the geese, you know.
Were we kind of in agreement on the idea of flipping the concessions and bathroom if we were to do two separate buildings for those? So the concessions would basically be where the bathrooms are, and the bathrooms would basically be where the concessions are.
Jacob, are you looking at the expanded version of this on the back?
Yeah, we can look at this side. Right? So, yeah, right now we have the concessions on the west side. If we flipped them, and the concessions was on the east side of the plaza picnic ice rink, and then pulled the volleyball courts back a little bit, does that
Oh, I see what you're doing.
accommodate what we're trying to do?
That's actually exactly what I had going forward in the concepts, Jacob. And the reason being is that would also be a slightly smaller structure, the bathroom would be, which would hopefully allow a little bit more buffer space between the volleyball courts if we're trying to put them in that area. So that's what I did have planned.
Are we considering the possibility of adding a second story on the main shelter concessions area as one of the things the city council had was sunsets?
Yep.
Wanted to see sunsets, and one of the ideas was a second level patio space. Is that a possibility to reduce the size of the footprint?
Still is to be conceptualized. What that lies out pricing wise, I'm not quite sure because we're not at that point, but if we're looking for a perfect ideal as we go through the concept process, that would be what I already had being drafted within the concepts. Now, 4,000 square feet for the concession shelter, I think is very large. If you did have a second story, I think you could generally decrease that 4,000 square foot layout.
Which might be a smaller footprint, to your point about.
So,
our-
yeah, so one of my
Hardscape
concerns
footprint.
was with ADA compliance, it needs to be 1 foot of rise over 12 feet of run. So to build a ramp, you generally need a longer structure to build a long ramp to get to a second floor. So, and I don't know if that'd be a possibility with,
I don't generally think that the second floor would be handicap accessible as long as all the same accommodations are met on the first floor. So if you do have restrooms, food service, et cetera, it would be on the first floor. So you would not have to match the second story to ADA compliance.
Going back to your flipping idea, I do like that idea of it looks like if you put the concession shelter, this is on the expanded one, you move that to the right, it's more in with the existing mound, the greenery, the nice part of the park, and then put the restroom shower over towards the volleyball courts, and it's away from what looks like the greener area.
how close so there's a sidewalk in front of the concession shelter, the restrooms, and the plaza rink. How close to the water is that proposed to be? Like, based on the look of this, I'm guessing 150 feet.
I would have to measure, I believe it's at least over 110, and that's an assumption. Any structures have to be a certain space away from the water as well. I don't exactly recall what that measurement is. But yeah, it would be over 100 feet.
Can I ask a clarifying question on this concept of flipping the concession shelter over? Or I guess we're flipping the restroom concession shelter, but
To the left.
to the left, but not moving the restroom shower has some financial benefit, likely. If we kept the restroom shower where it's located.
There are existing, so that would be kind of similar to where Herring's previously was, the sandbar. There is still sewer and water capabilities
Oh,
at that
okay.
location. So you're not necessarily, you're trading building for building, but you still have utility access.
Okay.
That makes sense.
That helps, thank you. Because the
Now-
other option was that if you left the restroom shower where it's at, and then you move the concession shelter all the way where the 900 square foot shelter is, pushed it all the way to the east, northeast. And
There are
then
not
you'd all be
utilities in that,
open, but then your plaza's not in a straight area. That kind of doesn't fit the mold
Yeah,
on the.
and that
design.
area, I'm trying not to have any water utilities, et cetera, in that section because we would be doing disturbing trees, root sections, stuff like that within that
Oh, just-
area.
Yeah.
I just have a question. This is going back to our meeting minutes that we announcements, recommendations for future items. It says decide upon final concept plan layout for the recreational parts of this, which I think we're doing now. I guess what I'm asking for, or can we, when we get these concepts, are we going to be at a point where we can say, this is our final recommendation, talking about keeping the beach big, turning these over, talking about how many parking spaces would be appropriate and where, and all those sorts of things. Are we going to be able to do that between now, our meeting that we're going to have in June, and then our July meeting, that we'll be able to make some sort of final recommendation to the city?
I think you could. It's up to you guys. I think there are some things that the board absolutely agrees upon unanimously, and there are certain things that are preferences between certain members of the board. But I think when you make the presentation to the city council, you can say what was generally the most preferred or favored, and I think you would be able to judge some of the public interest as well at the information meeting when you guys have it. What sections are more preferred than others? What more priorities do you have? Do people generally like to see a larger concession shelter? Would they like to see more volleyball courts on the property or less volleyball courts? Is there really a priority to have ice skating availability down at the park continue? So the concepts would be as close to finalized as possible, but I still think there's generally going to be a lot of variables with them. That's kind of a hard question to answer, but hopefully that kind of makes sense. I think you'll be able to judge your priorities a little bit better, getting more public feedback and input. Concepts would be completed at that point and would be publicly available. They would be attached as an actual attachment to the public information on the 23rd. But I suppose what I'm struggling with is when I do have an option A and an option B, there is a point to where I can only have the concept design adjusted so many times before we are required to provide a final version to city council. So I can have the rendering additional incorporations put in, like Susan was mentioning, for swales or planting areas within the beach. But we are getting closer to having a finite line on that. So when you complete your recommendation, I'll try to have it in the concept as much as possible, but you can also say addition, saying, as we go through this project, it would be generally preferred that we have this within the park. So you would be able to make Parks Board priorities known to City Council. But we are getting closer on that time frame. Even now, some of the conceptual changes and the concepts do take longer than expected, I suppose. But as long as you have your absolute priorities determined, you know you want a narrower beach, but you know you want an extended beachfront. Those are absolutes that, Parks Board would generally agree upon.
And I know it's not in this plan, and maybe it's too specific, but we have the 88 parking on the schematic. We don't have motorcycle parking, and I know some places have specific things for motorcycles because they take up less space and such. We don't have anything right now for golf carts or other access. And are we looking at potentially delineating places to say this is, or is it first come, first serve as whoever gets these parking spots?
At this point, no. I think Mary might have some input, but where I'm getting at with this is we will get the concept design as much as possible. That, again, that is going to be the concept design, but you can state that we as the Parks Board, you could say, we want to have motorcycle-specific accessible parking, potential if you want to have electronic bike charging stations. Am I going to have the time and the capabilities to get that within the concept drawing by the time we get to our final iteration? Most likely not at this point if we keep adding additions or including things, but you can make it stated as a priority that we would like these included in the final engineering and design versions.
For me, I think, again, if we're trying to promote recreation and access and such, and the more we can, we've talked about bicycles and all that, I think the more we can be inclusive and not be so, vehicle heavy, but we have to consider the boaters and the you know, the bikers and the motorbikers and the golf cart people, and if that adds too much complexity to the schematics, I can understand, but I do think as far as recommendations for recreational access, I think as a Parks Board, we would push that be considered.
I think that's where you guys should flesh out the conversation, you know, this evening. One of the things that we haven't really addressed at this point is there going to be boat beaching available? I have some other municipalities that do have long-term rentable boat slips, but less likely of short-term rentable boat slips. But do you want to have a designated spot within the beachfront where boats can park? I don't think we've really assessed that or addressed that yet at this point. But I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing out as many things as has been discussed up to this point.
Well, my concern about that, and again, this is just my limited, my parents used to live on a lake, and we used to have a lot of lake stuff, but it's neat to do boat beaching, but I don't think for sediment and for, you know, churning up the floor, I mean, the sea bed or lake bed is also good versus going up to a ramp or to a pier. So I would be a little bit concerned of promoting, even though it's cool, you know, we used to do it on the river all the time. I don't know if we as a city want to put that in the plan.
So what I would think at this point in preparation, because I think you're going to get a lot of feedback at a public information meeting, and that's going to be really beneficial to all of you, is if you can determine what the absolutes that the Parks Board has determined at this point, updated playground, like I said, the narrower beach but longer beach, figure out some of those absolutes that you guys know you want to move forward with. You know you want to provide a concession shelter. You know you want to provide a centralized plaza within the park. Figure out some of those absolutes this evening so that those would be things that we can bring to the public information meeting. And then the additions, like if you do want to have additional kayak rentals, you do want to have boat mooring, you do want to have electronic bike charging stations, those maybes that you want to draft at the park, include those as supplementary for the public information meeting. So if we can narrow down some absolutes this evening, we can include that on some documents for the PIM.
I had
Jason.
sorry. So I had a question. So I believe we are all in agreement that we want one continuous beach. Is there remotely a chance that we could break ground on something like that this fall?
This fall, the way that municipal budgets are made too, this fall, there are reserve funds available for Sandy Beach development. This fall, I think we would have to go through the permitting process because we would have to do some of that stuff with state required permits for wetland waterway permitting. So it would have to be a permit application. We'd have to figure out our absolutes or specifics that we would want to do for a beach redesign, and we would have to apply for permitting for it. So it would be dependable on that, but we do have that, I think Mike said $140,000 on retainer or reserve for capital improvement costs for Sandy Beach right now. It's kind of a long-winded answer, but it would be dependent on approved permitting. Most likely that would be a spring of '26 project.
But, oh, yes, sir, Anita.
Go ahead.
I said, I think we are in agreement about more beach on the water.
I agree. I just wanted to share one thing with the board. I walked out the beach today, just so everyone is aware, the 26 boat lifts occupy about 40% of the beachfront. So the part that is not designated as a swim area because of the boat slips is roughly 40% of the 900 feet of frontage. So just so the board is aware, like, it's roughly 40%. So if we want a continuous long beach, we have to really figure out the docks.
Could you just repeat that? Did you say 40% of the continuous beach is occupied by
So
boat
if you
lifts?
walk
I just
out-
want to make sure I got that.
If you walk out the beach. Yeah, absolutely. You got it. Okay, so if you walk out the beach, there is roughly 40% of the beach, the frontage, the 900 feet of frontage is dedicated. It's not zoned as a swimming area because of the boat slips in front of it. So if you look at the ropes, that's about 50%, and then you have like about 10% on far left and far right side of the beach. That's just not a beach right now. You know, very limited sand. So like, we have to be aware when we decide to do whatever we're gonna do with these slips, that it's occupying 40% of the 900 feet.
I think that would be something to touch on at the PIM. If you are considering, I know this conversation came up, it was approximately 3 years ago, if boat lifts were going to be retained or not within the park. If that's something that you want to see removed, I would make it very aware within the public information meeting that you're considering that as an option in favor of a larger beach. But I think gauging public input and public interest at the PIM would probably be appropriate for it.
And
I have
just
one-
go ahead, Mike.
Just want to make sure, very basic. Eric, is this the swale, this crosshatched area?
That Susan was referencing?
Yeah,
Yes.
good, okay.
So if you recall, we also discussed having one reconfigured, narrower, skinnier, I don't know if it'd be smaller, just on the west side.
Yeah.
So then that'd free up, what percent do you think, Jacob?
Well, I
mean,
know
just
each
out
of,
of a rough,
yeah, just
Yeah.
based on like walking it out and looking at a map, like you can look on any Google map and you can see the swim area is the same exact width as each lift system. So the far east side swim area is roughly 200 feet. The designated lift area is roughly 200 feet, roughly 200 feet of swim area, roughly 200 feet of lift area. So if we decide that we have to put all the boats on the west side, hypothetically, are we going to incorporate 400 feet of lift? Or the longer, thinner, is that the goal? Because I looked at a map and I was fairly surprised that,
Well, I have a question on that, Jacob. How is the current swimming area as it's defined by the ropes, is that, I don't go through that much, is it overused, is it crowded, is it pair enjoyment?
it's busy. It's on a
So it
hot,
is, okay, I don't
it's on a
know.
hot summer day, it's definitely busy. And
Packed, okay.
yeah, I think one of the obstacles is parents are telling their kids not to go on the lift because they want to jump on the dock.
Okay.
I would say that's one thing that I've gotten a lot of resident input as well as recreator input on and boat lift renter input, is that a lot of people are concerned that people are flowing into, or swimmers are flowing into the boat lift area just for safety reasons. So it has been noted in the past, it is fairly frequent that that happens. I would like to delineate motorboat, I know I've said this a couple times, but deviating motorboat access from swimmers as much as possible just for safety reasons.
Go ahead, Nan.
Okay. I thought that when we were talking, we were looking at perhaps not having a total of 6 potential food truck areas, particularly if we were looking at maybe a second story in the concessions building, and then having like the capacity for, if I understood, like a grill type setting or something like that inside there, right? That people could have like a, right, is what we talked about. They could do grilling in there, and offer that building as a potential place for, like, you know, a hamburger stand or something. Did we not talk about that? Okay. Because I think 6 is a lot, and maybe we might want to utilize that space for, I don't know if that would be a planting space or what that would be, but that's a big area. I just don't know about 6.
All right, thank you. I want to go back to the prioritization of our requests or our proposals, and going back to Jacob's comment about if we are going to go with the longer beach, and more access, more sand, closer to the water for people that are using the beach, then we have to think about, if that, then what are we going to do with, and if I'm visualizing this, it's basically from where the old boat launch was, the bait shop, and a little bit east of that. That's the place would be beach now.
Correct.
So things that are there, it's going either they're going to stay there, but now they're going to have sand in front of them, or we're going to move them over to the west, or we're going to start
not have them.
not having them or lessening them. And I think all those things we have to be very clear about for the public information or public input meeting, because I think that's going to be controversial.
It will be. I think some people in the audience could attest to that this evening. But what I would say is it is really flesh out the priorities of each of you and then as the board as a total, and be prepared to make it known at that PIM meeting on the 23rd if that's what we're planning this evening. So what I'll continue to do is try to flesh out as much as possible. I can prioritize planting locations if that's, Susan presented tonight. Is that a priority for the Parks Board to implement such things as we develop this concept? I mean, that's kind of what I'm struggling with, I suppose, is figuring out the absolutes.
And I'm just going to, this is my bias in that I like the water, I like the beach, and I want to keep it pristine, so we don't want pollution in it, we don't want runoff in it, we don't want any of those things. But we want people there. And if we have, and I've lived in the city for almost 30 years, and I live close to the Sandy Beach, the amount of people that are there on our big weekends in July and August, I think that beach is going to be full. And it is full. And we might even have to, so I do think we want to prioritize, at least I want to prioritize beach. And people being able to take their families and spread out without having to walk by people and step over people's coolers that are on a fat beach versus a thinner, longer beach, and still have access to clean, fresh, fun water. So I would really, really like to see us explore the concept of that long, skinny beach.
We all kind of agreed, no bait shop, right? I think that was dropped.
Correct.
The bait shop and the previous boat ramp would be removed regardless.
And I don't remember this, but it's already been determined there will be no fuel available.
I did look into that. There would not be fuel pump availability.
Okay. All right, so
Now, no, go ahead.
again, I just want to be real clear about priority, because to me, if we don't land on that one, because if we make it priority for this long, narrow beach, it's going to have impact on.
Yep. You would have limited, for one, permitting requirements for it as well, and then you would have limited beachfront. It's another feature that you're adding to the beachfront to take away from proposed beachfront, I guess you could say.
So, Mary, you had a question or
Well,
comment?
I was going to, I believe that Eric did do quickly the list of what I think are the decisions we made that we all agreed upon. So there was consensus. And so I just doing a little checklist on the list of things that we had talked about. One, continuous beach, so removal of the shack and the old launch. And then figuring out, we had a discussion, we were doing our meeting there at the beach, how we entertain whatever that culvert or whatever that was, a stormwater area, that would need some engineering to figure out how we address that, and maybe that's where some of the Susan's concepts go in with plantings, or maybe there's something interesting that would have to wiggle in there, I don't know, that would need some design. We all agreed on volleyball, but the number of volleyball we did not agree upon, and that was depending on the layout. We all agreed on a playground and moving it, we liked the location. So, and correct me if this is what I'm getting as our agreements, so if I'm wrong, jump in. We all agreed on the improvement to the restrooms with the outdoor showers, because that was a high need. We agreed on picnic tables, additional shelters, trees. Where's what? Well, I handed out the little, I sent you all that little criteria matrix maybe a few weeks ago. I'm just reading off of there because it was all of our brainstorm on it, so I'm just checking. Here, I have an extra one. I may have extras. Here. Trees, okay, trees, we all agreed trees, so whatever trees we may lose, we were going to look to see, we are expecting trees strategically and important to replant of trees. And, okay, so then we also all seem to like the ice skating rink and the pavilion, having the layout of that center, what'd you call it, the plaza that can be repurposed and reused as an ice rink with a concession shelter, possibly two-story, whether it's right or left. And then we had a list of ideas. So those were the things, then there were things that came out like, do we want fire pit area? Do we want, like, how we handle the slips or lifts? And so we had some outstanding decisions, but those are the ones that I've checked that we all, oh, and some food truck area, but not
Yep.
necessarily how many. That we were supporting food trucks, but we wanted to talk more definition about what concession. We didn't want to block out an idea just for somebody to come do burgers. Like
Yeah,
more of a-
perfect.
So am I missing anything?
No, that's what I believe we went over. Now, some of those outstanding things that you had mentioned, like slip availability, the quantity, the locations, those would be the things that I would be expected to hear from at the PIM. So those would be kind of things to think about at this time. Where you would like them on the beach, how many, are they going to be reduced in favor of a swimming area? Are they going to be added? Well, we actually can't, we're at the maximum amount of permanent locations, but that's kind of where I'm getting at, is that's what the Parks Board will have to determine what your priorities will be in, I think, as you come into a PIM, so you can make it known to the public who will be speaking there. And your priorities may change based on their input at the PIM too.
We also had kayak rental, excuse me, I forgot one, kayak rental.
Yeah, the kayak rental or not powerless, but stand-up boards and kayaks and such.
Sure.
The other thing that I think we have agreed, and I think what Mary just said, we have agreed on, we want to have the Long Beach. We want to have, and I want to be very clear, though, when we talk about the shelter would be one story with a roof patio, not a second story.
You're correct, yeah.
Yeah,
It's going to be open air.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
basically
I
going
just
to
want
be
to be
a,
very clear that it's not going to be a two-story thing. It's
Yeah.
going to be a single story with a patio roof.
yep, so that's exactly where I'm getting at. That's generally the direction you would like to go. You would like to see that preferred within the park. That's beneficial, I guess, as you move forward with some of this.
Yeah. And, go ahead, Mary.
Okay, when we also discussed not replacing, okay, make sure that more decisions that we made, we discussed not removing the inside the park volleyball court and making that a natural area. And likewise, when we remove the proposed playground, turning that back into natural area. And we supported moving the maintenance shed closer to the food truck plaza, so that all would be cleaned out in that back area. And then minimizing taking the road out and making it a path, as minimal of a path kind of concept to not have a lot of hardscaping. And that we were kind of along the lines of how it is now perhaps, but maybe a little bit different because we were making the beach narrower. So those are the things that we had, I believe, all agreed on. How's that?
Correct. So when those concepts are received, they'll be sent to all the Parks Board members. They'll be used as supplementary documents as we go through the PIM. What you can do is, when the public actually voices their input, you can wager what is generally the best received, what is poorly received, what is perhaps something that wasn't thought about or considered before that you may want to prioritize in favor of something else or add. That's my recommendations, at least, is to come prepared with your thoughts, decisions, and priorities for each member.
I had a question, Eric. So when we're talking about the lifts and slips, like obviously continuous Long Beach is a huge priority, and obviously sounds unanimous. But when we get these renderings, are they going to take into account the shape of the lifts and slips? Are we going to try and go out as far as possible? Because if we're just making them 200 feet wide each, then it kind of sounds like we just basically have a small beach on one side. And a
Yes,
huge lift system on the
one of the things, or one of the struggles with this is actually water depth, pier style, and how it actually works with providing the same number of boat lifts while also prioritizing the expanded beach, so it's been difficult to get both of those priorities to be represented within the rendering, because that comes along with different pier styles. We can't have permanent year-round piers. They have to be seasonal, removed and reinstalled. So what products and availability are out there that would have both of those priorities? So that's what's being worked on.
Does a slip system as opposed to a lift system allow us to go farther in the water?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Jacob. I think we had a discussion that it's going to be slips, not lifts.
You're correct. So based off of last meeting's discussions, that's what's being designed to accommodate as many spots as we currently have.
And is that possible? So when we decide you have slips, not lifts, and go out as far as the DNR allows us to go, can we provide the same number of docking units?
Generally, yes, some swim area deviation may have to happen, but I think it is a decent compromise between, I suppose that's what you guys will determine when, you may see it come back and say, yep, that looks great, there's adequate swimming space and there's adequate spots for the boat lifts, or that takes up too much of the swim area or the boat, or too much of the swim area, let's generally not go this route. So that's kind of what we're struggling to determine at this point.
Because if we're not having lifts and we're going with slips.
They are still skinnier, but we still have to accommodate enough space for
Right,
each
but if-
watercraft.
And do we know how far out we can go? Because if that's the case, then we should be able to maintain the elongated beach, should we
Yeah.
not?
Yes, so it does come down to actually product design too, is what we're looking
That
at.
we don't know yet.
Yep, so that's what we're looking at. We're trying to get as many spots accommodated as possible, so we're not reducing
Right.
amenities that we currently have, trying to carry over as many of our current amenities that we're offering into the concepts that are being done.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
And then, I'm sorry, Mary, go ahead.
Well, the only thing on the slip design, the one conversation we had regarding the only place for boaters to come up and use the restrooms is Sandy Beach. And we, uncovered that, was it 50 feet from the swim buoys is not non-motorized, and that's not what's happening today. People come pulling up and they slide in between Woodland Beach and the east side, and which is probably against the desired state. And so like how to handle visiting boats to be able to use the restroom area is something we haven't found a solution for yet. So that it's part of recreation, because we have recreators on the water, how to make sure they can reach our amenities. The amenities in the park is still outstanding. And the slips might be an option for that, like a rent by the hour slip or something of that nature. Or we figure out how to handle the others, the mooring, or the, someplace to sand beach it somehow.
I'm looking at our plan, full site plan, and just for clarity, the moorings that I'm seeing on the east side are for canoes and kayaks and such, not powerless, but non-motorized.
No, in the version that you're seeing for R, this colored version here, those were 50% or around 50% of the boat lifts. Remember, we had talked about what's in this concept here is similar to what we have now. Rather than one boat lift section being in the center of the park, they were moved completely on the east and the west in the first version of Concept R.
Okay, so those are slips.
Those are,
Motorized.
yes, that's motorized watercraft.
Okay.
Now, based off of where I'm going with the updated concept drawings, is delineating motorized watercraft as much as possible to the west side of the park, with the east side being retained for non-motorized access.
Yeah, I'm looking at this plan that's there now, that's
Okay.
not exactly what we're talking about as far as our priorities to
Yep.
beach and motorized at the west side.
Yep.
This for safety and for
Yep,
access.
that's
and-
exactly what'll be planned, and that's kind of the struggle that we're balancing now, is what products are available to get us far enough out to accommodate that, while, like I said, also prioritizing the swim beach. So that's what's being balanced within the concept design. So some of those things are a little bit difficult to actually flesh out. Is this concept realistic and actually going to happen, is what we're figuring out at this point.
And I don't know as far as the budgeting and things like that, but I'm going back to like, your Governor Dodge State Park, Devil's Lake State Park, some of these big popular parks. If we needed to have a rest facility, a restroom, that might be something we could put there on what I'm looking at the south end, right at the very beginning of the parking area. They could maybe just put a couple places there so that someone coming in or leaving, they could use that as a place to stop. Because
Can I ask
we're used to walking pretty far to.
Yeah.
if
Can
you
I ask
plan
for
it.
clarification on that? Are you referring to boaters or park goers or what?
Anyone, but a restroom at the very, where the parking is. I'm looking at this, be the south, the yellow, the south, it'd be southeast. before you
I
get to the
would
green.
generally prefer not. We do have handicap and porta toilets available at the boat launch for those users. Now, for the parks users and interior of the park, we have the restroom shelter, and then we were talking about the picnic shelter being the handicap accessible restrooms
Okay,
there.
right.
For the sake of, I suppose I generally just would not be in favor of having separate restroom facilities in the parking lot.
Okay, I just bring it up because we want to make sure, again, for recreation, people need to be able to get to facilities without walking, especially with children and such a
Now,
long
let
way.
me mention though too, is that if we are pursuing a paid parking option, you would be able to walk in the park and freely use the restrooms and enter the park.
Okay,
So just want to make sure that that's understood.
okay.
Yeah, I was more worried about accessing from the people who are using the lake. So if you're
Right,
a
right.
boater or kayaker or someone who's on the lake, kayaks can slide in, but a boat doesn't have a place to park to use the restrooms anywhere on the lake.
Yeah.
We'd almost have to have designated temporary slips available for people who want to just come up for an hour. You could limit it to an hour or something like that, but I don't see any way out of that.
Yeah, you just got to have a place for people to use the facilities that are not having to go up to the restaurant or go through the beach or something
Like
like
Mary
that.
said, there's a couple options that can be done there. Like I said, we got a finite space of time, or of space. We have a very small section of space that we actually have to use. So would it be an hour parking? Would it be no permanent parking? Like someone has to be on the boat or you would tether it for no more than so-and-so minutes. Now it comes down to enforcement. We would enforce it with CSOs, which is our community service officers, but that's not always going to be available and reliable all the time because there may not be a CSO stationed at that time in the park, so there's positives and negatives to it. If there is temporary mooring allowed, I think that it would have to be enforced, though, otherwise it would be abused.
Eric, last time, I believe it was last time, we talked about the possibility of installing a small slip on the west side of the boat launch. I think it's by a stormwater drain.
We wouldn't have the space to
There's
accommodate
absolutely no
it.
possibility of that, okay.
We wouldn't have the space to accommodate it with how far we would have to go and where the pier design is on the neighboring property owner. It would be uncomfortably close to the motorboat traffic of the boat launch as well as the neighboring property owner's piers.
Yeah, the neighboring property owner kind of slides over in front of the park area, the way it's angled, I think to get access. It just is a weird,
I think it would be the potential for safety concerns if there was an
Yeah.
actual slip on that side.
All right, so I'm just going to go back to our priorities. So we're going to have the beach as long as we can, narrow and accessible. We're going to have volleyball courts. We're going to have 4 volleyball courts that are as configured as best we can.
I think that's yet to be determined. I think the absolute, and I don't want to speak for any Parks Board members, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the absolute is that you want volleyball court access. The number of volleyball courts, I don't think is unanimously decided at this point. Is that
Fair point.
correct?
Yes, fair point. Thank you for that. But we do want volleyball access. Thank you for the clarification. We want the ice skating there, and we want that again with a warming place and such. And we want the accessibility. What was the other thing I'm thinking? We want to have the, what do we call it? The plaza. We want the plaza to be open and with, I think Anita brought it up, that people can grill their own if they'd like.
Yes,
the
we would
numbers that-
still have grills within the park and
We also have a priority is trying to maintain the resources as far as boat parking, slip, sort of a thing. So if we, and I apologize, I don't remember, how many boat people do we have down there now?
26.
26? So we want to try to keep 26, which is the maximum we can have by the DNR right now.
That's what's currently permitted, yeah. So we can't exceed that.
Okay, so that's, again, we would love to keep that there, right?
I had just a question. So when we talk about long continuous beach, are we also like agreeing that it's going to be a same size swimming area? So if we have hypothetically
Yes.
800 feet of beach, we're going to have 800 foot
Yes.
swimming. So we're going to roughly double the swimming area by doing this.
Yes.
Okay.
Will the swimming area be longer and thinner then also?
No,
They'll still say the boys out there, I can't remember how many feet. it is.
as much as swimming space is available.
Okay, similar to Bartles Beach.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there any plan to add a lifeguard?
I think that would be the next conversation. I think if you are increasing the amount of, that's a difficult one to answer really, because there is something, I'm sure, I don't want to speak for Dan, but he could chime in on this too. There is recreational immunity. If you're partaking in a form of recreation, you assume recreational immunity, or the city would have recreational immunity to that. That person has voluntarily completed that form of recreation, therefore we would not be liable for what happens at that point. I think Dan would be able to speak more to that. I would say that if you are increasing that much, it's either going to be increased CSO coverage or lifeguard duties. I'm not quite sure at this point what it would look like operationally. You can say, though, that increasing the amount of expected people and attendees, therefore you would need more enforcement. If you can say our current enforcement is less than adequate or adequate, what we currently staff for CSOs would not be enough if you double the size of the beach.
Just for clarity, so we're talking about Dan Drescher, the city attorney.
Correct, yeah. So I don't want to speak for any legal, that's my understanding of it, not legal advice or input.
Right. When we're talking, the CSOs, those are the community's safety officers?
Community service officers.
Right. So then, we might have to recommend our proposal that if this, then we need to have X amount of them on certain weekends or certain high capacity
Yep, and you can
times.
keep it as brief as, when you form your recommendation, you can say that we recommend increased law enforcement presence or increased CSO availability or shifts or something along those lines.
Anything else?
I had an idea. I don't know if this is a place for it. Is there ever been a thought of adding possibly an electrical post in the center of the beach, potentially for live music, maybe like once or twice a year? I know there used to be a festival.
There would be, I think generally that would be in a patio area around the actual shelter. I don't think I would recommend pursuing it on the actual beach itself. What I do see eventually, though, is if there are going to be performances down there, if there's going to be Friday night bands or something, I think the shelter would probably be the adequate space for it.
Are we looking at, Eric, do we have a set capacity for how many people can be on Sandy Beach or Bartles Beach or any of our parks?
I don't know if there is a calculation for that. That's a good question. I know there is a calculation for legal requirements of restroom facilities for a known number of participants at an event or something like that. There is a legally required amount of facilities that you need to have available to the general public. How that would play into a general admission park, I'm not quite sure. My general thought process is overbuild the facilities as much as possible, because what we currently have is inadequate for high visitation during the park. But then it's also a balance. It's too much when you're at low visitation of the park. But that's at least something that I can look into to see what the generally recommended number is for size of the park, if it's based off of square acreage or parking spots. I'm not quite sure.
Right, but I think as a Parks Board, we should, as one of our priorities, should make this a pleasant place to be. You know, you don't want to go where it's so packed.
I think that would
you're stepping
generally
over each
be
other.
I think there would be pseudo enforcement with that if you have paid parking. Granted, people park all the way up Sandy Beach Road and they maximize that location as much as possible. It comes down to, would parking on Sandy Beach Road enforced, and then you only have the allotted amount of paid parking stalls at Sandy Beach? That could be a way to enforce it and potentially have a cap of visitation on the park. I'm not quite sure though.
I don't know about so much about that, because I think people kind of like self-organize. You know, it gets
Yeah.
super crowded. You don't go there on, at least I don't go down there on 4th of July weekend. But I think you kind of self-regulate. But I was going more to the capacity issue as far as the restrooms and,
If we don't have a gate attendant, or if we don't have, you would have to have some way to turn people away from access to the park if you're worried about capacity limits. I don't really know the best way to do that besides parking enforcement and access enforcement. I'm not quite sure how that would look.
I'm just going back to the state parks. I mean, you go up to Devil's Lake on a certain weekend, they just turn you away. They're up at the, what's
Yeah.
that?
Oh, I didn't know that.
There is a maximum amount of admittance, basically. So I think one of the options to do that would be, like I said, pseudo. I think people would still find their way access into the park, but would be parking enforcement with a paid parking system. But that means you're not going to stop people from parking along the road, but you would have to enforce parking along the road. So sections of Sandy Beach Road would have to be no parking and enforced. That could be a way to manage admissions, I guess.
Okay.
I think no matter what, though, on a 4th of July weekend, the park would be slammed. I think that's by design. It's a beach. It is going to be very, very busy.
Any other questions, comments regarding the resolution? And then what our next plan is or such for the public input meeting and such?
I would plan for that June 23rd meeting in the community center. I will see if there are other options for it. I think the community center also lends itself well to public information meetings because it's a little bit more of an open forum format. I know we've done PIMs down there in the past. You're receiving input from the public, and it's generally received well when you're in a setting like that, at least from my experience. But that would be my only thought process, is to prepare for a PIM and be ready to receive input from the public.
And, you know, we have our priorities and our such. Are there anything at this point that we're saying that's not negotiable? I mean, are we at a place where putting plantings to prevent geese and, you know, E. coli causing things, to me, that's something, no, that's not negotiable. We are going to have those. You know, we are going to have something that prevents.
If I can speak, at
Minimizes.
least when I'm forwarding the concept designs here, when I'm having these concepts created, I think there are very few things that are absolutely off the table at this point. I mean, there could be things that are way outside of the capacities to do, but at this point, I don't think we've reached any of those yet. I think the struggles that we're still balancing is prioritizing space within the park. What are you going to favor for recreational amenities, and how much space is it going to take up in the park? Or which recreation form are you going to prioritize over boat slips, or vice versa? I mean, that's, I think, what is still really uncertainty right now.
An observation on that, in my experience, is that people who have a very specific self-identified issue, i.e. a boater, will turn out much more enthusiastically than people who, for instance, are swimmers or beachgoers, and they don't see this as a, you're taking away my spot. So I just think that needs to be weighed when you get the input. Inevitably, I believe we'll get far more impassioned and enthusiastic input on behalf of boat owners than we will on the nameless beach users. And that's where it's a balancing act for a governmental.
Yeah, I do think, though, if you build it, they will come. And so if we have things that attract butterflies, and we have things that attract birds, and we have things that people can identify said critters, I think that's a good thing. So that's what I'm saying, is prioritize. I want to make sure that we don't, I mean, we do, make sure that we're preserving the water, and we're adding an amenity, a recreational amenity, being the plantings, the
No,
native
that-
plantings.
And I'm agreeing with that, Tim. I'm just saying in general that.
Oh, yeah.
I think we all are quite committed to the beach and to the beach goers, but be prepared that there will probably be a much more organized enthusiasm on the part of a focus group, i.e. boat owners.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing we're trying to be very clear about, we're not trying to take anything away from anybody. Yeah, we're trying to make sure we get a good mix of recreational use from people that are powerless, non-motorized, power boats. You know, it's just all matter, can we all play nice with each other?
Mr. Chair, may I be recognized?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Lisa Curler, I'm a member of the City Council, and I'm only asking to speak to just make a suggestion that your board might want to consider the format and how you run your public informational meetings, since it sounds like you're planning to have in just a couple of weeks. And one technique that I know some of the other boards have used effectively is to have a form that people can fill out if they want to do written comments, because they may not feel like speaking, or they may want to speak informally. So just a suggestion that I wanted to make that you consider, asking people to say what they like or don't like about the plan, for example, and any suggestions they have. So
And making that available probably online, I should think, so that they don't have to attend,
that
correct?
would be up to you if you want to make that available ahead of time, or, just collect them that evening, or people can submit them if they can't attend. But again, I just wanted to suggest that you might want to think about the format and the ways that you want to collect input so that it can be the most effective.
Yeah, thank you. Process and formatting is important.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah.
So how I envision the agenda for the public information meeting is I'll have the updated concepts attached to that. I can also include what we have for absolute recreational amenities or something, a list of this is really what's prioritized currently by the Parks Board. And if there are any brash oppositions to it, but these are generally what the Parks Board prefers. And then perhaps like a blank form for written public comment, like Lisa was mentioning, all as attachments on the agenda. But I think it should be stated very clearly, these are the bullet points that the Parks Board prefers for this project.
Thank you. And I just do have a process question with that. With the either online or in-person forms and questions or comments, is it required they put their name and address on those
I
to be
believe so,
accepted?
yes. I believe so, yes.
Okay. I just want to make that clear that if we do have that out there, they have to put their,
Yep, it would be treated just like any vocal public comment. If someone came up, they would have to sign in. So if they have a written comment, they would have to provide the same.
right, thank you.
And if we also could make sure that we are very clear on what is out of scope for the Parks Board. So the
Yes.
parking lot and the mobile
Trailer
home
park.
park are out, so that just people who may have an interest there, that we'll always welcome, because we can pass it along, just as general information, knowledge, but the focus is on, as we have it, maybe ensuring the resolution is just reaffirmed, that
Yeah.
ours is the improvements, recreational amenity improvements and priorities.
That would be fine. So what I will do at this point then is, Tim, if it's okay, I will work directly with you in developing a draft for that. I would like to do it as far in advance as possible, so that would probably be this week into early next week. Finalize that as soon as possible with publishing ideally by the end of next week is kind of where I'm looking at timeline-wise, or as soon as possible.
Yeah, I have a question for Anita, though, because this goes to the process. I'm available this week. Next week, I'm not. So I'm wondering if it is something like that, we can loop Anita in as vice chair.
That would be fine. It would not be quorum.
Yeah. So is that okay?
Yep, that would be fine. So that's what I'll do is I'll work with both of you. I will CC both of you in an email as I go through the actual drafts for it. I would anticipate that the last things to be received would more than likely be these concepts.
Okay. Thank you.
If I could just.
Yes,
So-
Anita.
So this matrix that Mary put together is very helpful, since I think we're all in agreement that part of recreational enjoyment and safety does have to do with controlling beach quality, E. coli, et cetera. that we really do need to add something on here. I don't know what the wording exactly would be, but that,
Hence,
There is
Yeah.
an-
stormwater.
there is an-
and waste
There is an
management.
environment, and water quality was one of our objectives, so there is stormwater management, E. coli mitigation, and a tree plan were the things that we had all discussed that I wrote in that
okay,
column.
I'm sorry, I missed it.
Did you catch that? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And I had sent this to Eric, and he had forwarded this on in his attachment several weeks ago, so, yeah. Sorry. Nope, no worries. I was trying to keep myself organized, so while I'm doing that, I thought I would share.
Just, do we have to have a quorum for the 23rd? Because I think I told you I'm not going to be here and I won't be available online either.
From my understanding, nothing is being decided.
Okay.
At least that would be my understanding, that you would
Yeah,
not
we
need
can
quorum.
clarify that with city council and/or Dan. But I would say not in that it's a listening session, it's a prioritization session, not a decision.
I think generally it would be
Listening,
nearly required to have 3 of you there, so the majority of the board is reflected.
I'm there.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'm there too. I do have and Mary, this goes to a request for clarity on the part about the environmental and water quality. Stormwater management is the first bullet point. And then E. coli mitigation. So stormwater management, would that be something like landscaping and this or that? And then E. coli mitigation would be plantings and
Yes,
such?
and I think some of the strategies may do both,
Yeah,
but I had them as separate because I think they can be looked at separately, but they might have some common.
yeah. No, I think that's really good, as people know that stormwater is more like structural. And then the E. coli mitigation might be more design, selection and design. So we might want to make a note that that's part of our priorities, making sure they're using natives, making sure that there's a height limit, because we don't want to have pampas grass, up there.
No pampas grass.
That's right. So. So we are at 7:31, and agenda item yet is this discussion. Are we prepared to make any recommendations or motions, or where are we at with our agenda?
We wouldn't be at this evening's meeting because it is just discussion, so this was just formalizing content, I suppose, in preparation for PIM and moving the concept designs a little bit further along. So there wouldn't be any forming of recommendations this evening.
Okay.
I had a question about the structures. They were kind of planning on building the different shelters. Is there anything that we can do with these shelters that, like, maybe it's a butterfly garden on a roof, or is there something that we could add to these structures that would prevent geese, or like those those things people put on their docks? I don't know
Sure, there could be.
if that's something that'd be remotely.
There could be. What I will say generally for picnic shelters, I think I was seeing some of the department's priorities when we first started. Ease of maintenance would be a large priority for mine, at least. I could see something like that if there were a planting on the roof or something being a little bit difficult to maintain. So I would still like to retain ease of maintenance for shelters, at least from operational standpoints.
Are there any devices to keep geese away, or to help
There are ones that I know of are sound making devices. I mean, there are bird bombs or agricultural things that are propane cannons, basically, that are used to keep flocks away from crops.
but nothing like passive that you could just kind of keep going?
Things that work well, not from my experience.
Active, they have, you can hire dogs, like they'll run dogs to chase
I
them out. I mean, there's different strategies like that. but
Generally
that's all
kind of laugh
active.
if anyone's familiar with the condos on the north side of the lake. There's a coyote statue that's there that looks really menacing, but there's always geese around it. So, I
It
mean,
doesn't move.
for benefit and actual practicality, I wouldn't think so.
A 12 gauge is probably the best.
I do have a question that goes back to, is there any way we could have at the public input, a representative from Lake Ripley and their process and what they've done as far as that, or is that getting too much into the weeds?
I think that would probably be at the following meeting as a presenter input. I think the PIM would be specifically to receive input.
So Eric, what do we need to do yet now, in your opinion, for the PIN? Do we have to address the specific number of boat slips or something? I
No,
just
for
wanna-
the PIM at this point, I would not think so. But
Okay.
what I would think about is come August, when the recommendation is due, plan for basically the final decision to be either the July or August Parks Board meeting to have your recommendation finalized. More than likely the August Parks Board meeting, which would leave the second city council meeting in August available for Parks Board to give their recommendation.
And for this public input, how are we going to publicize this? How are we going to let people know?
The publication requirements for I forget the name now, the leader, I forget the new
Independent
name
or
of the
something?
newspaper. Some of the publication requirements have changed. My goal would be to at least publish it within the paper once or as much as possible prior to the PIM. I don't know if we would even be allowed within that deadline at this point, because it is June 9th today, and they do have different publication requirements. But I would have city website posting, Facebook posting. We can have it on the front page of the city website as much as possible. The agendas will also be posted at any public location, so this will include the post office, library here at city offices, as much as possible.
And
So the
then-
newspaper would be the one that may be questionable at this point, just because I don't know the required deadline.
And just to be clear, we want the people to have input on the beach, the volleyball, the ice rink, the single story with patio top,
Yeah, or basically you can make it as broad as any recreational development or input within Sandy Beach Park. You can leave it as broad as that, but you could state, here are Parks Board's current priorities drafting the
something like
developments.
that. I wanted to limit it as much as we can, but be clear that, again, we're not trying to eliminate things, we're just trying to make it more usable for more people and make it safe and environmentally responsible.
So I think the way, I'll work on that as you and I work together in drafting some of the language for it, but you could say, this is what Parks Board is currently prioritizing for these recreational developments. You could cite some of the things within the city council resolution as well, and you could say, our priorities were determined for not removing current recreational amenities, prioritizing public safety and ecological impacts to the park. So you could say what developed your current priorities.
And I also think modeling successful projects, and if we want to make a,
If available, I think I'll lean on you pretty heavy as we draft some of these things for the PIM, so I'll reach out to you as we draft it.
I had a question. So one of the matrix that Mary gave us, it says restaurant was #1 in the survey. I think that one of the issues we might be running across is defining what a restaurant is.
I agree.
Is a restaurant simply serving food? Is it food and a place to sit? Are there servers? Is alcohol being served?
Is there air
Is it air
conditioning?
conditioning? Is it heated? Like, defining a restaurant, I think, is kind of one of the things we're seemingly struggling with.
I would agree with you. That's one of the things that you would have to narrow down. What is a concession shelter? Is that a dining location? Is that a bar? Is that a tap room? What does that structure look like, and what features does it have? Are food trucks limited, to less, but then you have more food service within a shelter? Is it purely an open box to where packaged foods or goods are sold out of? That's what you'll have to determine a little bit, and then realize, what is the city capable of running, owning, and operating? Would it be under a lease structure? Would there be employees that run it? What facilities are actually within that structure? So these are, again, some of the things that need to be.
I would like to back up a little
Flushed out.
bit with that in this, because, again, we're a recommendation entity, not a decision entity. And yet we could recommend, because what I've heard from public comment is people really miss the sandbar.
Yep, so that would be, you would like to see a concession shelter that,
So what I've heard is, they want it to be sandbar-like, not fancy, not big, warm, but, with a nice patio and things like that.
Generally, I think the discussion of the restaurant has lapsed with the current or with the past referendum. But what you could say is this concession shelter, what is it? What does it offer? May fill some of that niche, but I do want to make it clear that the restaurant idea had not passed in the referendum at the city council level.
Yeah, so you might get that public input, though. Yes,
Question, have we discussed the potential for air conditioning in that concession pavilion? I don't recall.
At this point, I think it would be, at least what I envisioned was an open air shelter with a closed portion that would also serve as the warming shelter. Perhaps that closed in portion could be air conditioned as well, but I envisioned that area to be similar to Court Park. That's what I had at least envisioned.
And then Tim, I think at our last meeting had said, well, whoa, what if you just made it a little wider and put like 3 pub tables? I'm making this up, three tables, and it was air conditioning or big fans or something. And so I think designing kind of it is a little bit of the breadth of what we're calling restaurant or concession. What amenities will it or will it not have? And I don't know if that gets necessarily to recreational amenity improvements, although maybe eating can be considered part of rec. I mean, it's fueling the body to recreate. But we've had a lot of good discussion about it.
Yeah. So you could say, like, keep it fairly broad. A concession shelter would have minor food service available, and you could outline kind of what minor food service would be, with the potential for 3 seasons operating with majority open air, 1 section closed. I mean, that could be as broad as you could keep it. Or this is a concession shelter that sells prepackaged food and amenities. It kind of depends on how you word it for a recommendation.
and I apologize for my lack of knowledge of the county park that's on the north part of the lake. Do they, I know they have restrooms and such, but it's a shelter. There's nothing more in that shelter than a shelter.
It's a shelter, and then it has a serving counter, but that's for plug-in Nesco style serving. Think of it like graduation style rentable shelter is really what it is.
So anything else before we move on? So for clarity, Eric and myself and Anita are going to work on creating a more specific.
So it doesn't interfere with the decisions of the board. This would basically be the drafting of the agenda and the format for the PIM.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's move to item number 7 on the agenda, if it's okay. All right. Announcements, any announcements? Mike, you said you were going to miss which meeting?
I will be unavailable for the PIM.
All right, so that,
En route, and I simply won't be able to be there. I will be in July on the 14th. If I'm not here, I will make myself available via a Zoom.
okay,
And
thank
the
you.
same in August. It looks like I'm going to be, it's summer, and I've got stuff lined up. In August, I'm going to be probably, if I'm not here, I'll be on a Zoom.
Okay, thank you. Any other announcements? None, okay, thank you. 8, creating next meeting agenda items. So
Tim.
we've already got some of them made to continue this discussion. Maybe, are we going to be able to,
Christmas, it would be the Christmas decoration layout or separation of responsibilities. I think that would be more of a presentation going over that on what was drafted by Legendary Lake Mills. It would be generally in operating guidelines. I don't think it would require Parks Board approval, but at least recognizing what the procedure is for holiday decoration installation.
and we also had, let's see, placement of basketball courts in the Fayville Park. I think that was yours, Jason, was it not?
Correct. So I feel like basketball courts could replace the volleyball courts existing at Fayville. I just see it's an unused piece of property. And as far as the city goes, there is not really a centralized basketball court. There's Brookstone and Rotary, and that's about it.
Or do we want to put that on the?
Where that lies, would basically be through capital requesting processes for budgetary stuff. It would be requesting funds, at least from my department, for the installation of basketball courts at Fayetteville, for whichever season as soon as possible.
I would love to move forward with that, and I don't know if it'd be more cost effective because the sand is already down for any sort of surface, or it feels like it's a slam dunk, not to use the worst pun possible. Kind of intentional.
But to be clear, though,
Kind of, sort of, not really, sort of.
Did you like the drum roll?
And on a high note,
Yeah.
Turn your mic off.
High top note. So we agree, we're gonna put that on the agenda to make a recommendation, is that what we're looking for with that? The recommendation to create basketball courts at Fayetteville and get rid of,
basically just put a basketball court on top of an unused volleyball court.
can we keep it as something as simple as that? Parks Board prefers to replace the volleyball courts at Fayetteville Park with basketball courts at some point. Where that lies timing-wise, I'm not quite sure, and if I get pricing or
it'd be a
anything.
recommendation, but I think we can put it on the agenda and make a recommendation to that. Correct?
Correct.
All right. So we got those. Any other things for the agenda?
Well, that, I think we'll have to comprehensive outdoor plan again, just be in the future, not necessarily at this upcoming meeting.
That's totally fine.
Yeah, I think that's going to be too much.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
so that's totally fine. But I guess we want to make sure we keep on,
Keep it on the burner.
yes, future agenda items. All right, anything else for, again, we got the introduce and review the procedure for comprehensive outdoor plan. Next meeting is 5:30 on July 14th. Anything else? All right, at 7:46, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, folks.
Thank you.